Today on RoxomTV News, Donald Trump sues the IRS and Treasury for $10 billion after leaks tax records trigger one of the largest data breach lawsuits in United States history. In Minneapolis, federal officials quietly scale back high-visibility ICE raids as protests spread nationwide and the political fallout reaches Washington. And Trump taps Kevin Warsh to lead the Federal Reserve, a Fed chair nominee who's openly talked about Bitcoin pushing crypto straight into the center of monetary policy. All that and more right now on today's show. Let's get into it. Good morning, happy Friday, and welcome back to another edition here at RoxomTV News. We are back in our studio, home sweet home. It's good to be back. And guys, when we get a second, I'm getting a little double speak in my earpiece. Let's check that out. But now, let's get started with our top story of the hour, as President Donald Trump has nominated Kevin Warsh to serve as the next chair of the Federal Reserve, confirming a decision markets had been anticipating for weeks. Now, Trump announced the nomination after meeting Warsh at the White House, calling him a strong fit for the role, with the appointment set to take effect when Jerome Powell's term ends in May, pending Senate confirmation. Now, Warsh previously served on the Federal Reserve Board from 2006 to 2011 and was closely involved during the 2008 financial crisis. In more recent years, he has become a vocal critic of the central bank, arguing for changes to its policy framework, a smaller balance sheet, and a reassessment of how credibility is maintained. What has drawn attention from the Bitcoin world is Warsh's public commentary on Bitcoin itself. He has described Bitcoin as an important asset that can signal whether monetary policy is working as intended, and has compared its role for younger generations to gold's role in the past. Now, supporters see the nomination as a potential shift toward a Federal Reserve leadership that is more open to alternative monetary signals. Critics, however, argue that any Fed chair, regardless of personal views, is constrained by institutional mandates and political pressure. Confirmation may also face resistance in the Senate, with some lawmakers raising concerns about Federal Reserve independence and broader governance issues. For those of you at home, this matters because the Federal Reserve's decision shapes borrowing costs, asset prices, and economic conditions far beyond Wall Street. Even a chair who speaks favorably about Bitcoin does not automatically mean a change in how monetary policy is executed. What it does signal is that Bitcoin has moved from the fringe of financial debate into the conversation at the very top of the global monetary system. All right, joining us this morning to talk about this story and others, one of our good friends of the program, Fernando, the Bitcoin Libertarian. Fernando, welcome back. Always great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Always great to be here with you again. It's been just one day since I appeared last time here, and I'm so happy to be with you discussing this news of the day.
Yes, it's great to have you back, Fernando. 2 days in a row. It's been quite the treat. And I want to talk about this most recent news. So, Fernando, when you hear that President Trump is nominating someone who at least has spoken positively about Bitcoin to now run the Federal Reserve, do you feel a sense of optimism there? Or is your gut reaction telling you that maybe the Fed ultimately does what the Fed always does, no matter who's sitting in the chair?
I think that, yeah, as you said, usually Fed does what they usually do. But of course, having a friendly Bitcoin director of the Fed is always good news, because I'm one of these guys that, even though I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, for me, the only digital asset is Bitcoin. I'm not against institutions adopting Bitcoin. And if central banks are friendly to Bitcoin, these are always good news, because you're going to be sure that they are not going to go against the people who hold Bitcoin, against the companies that hold Bitcoin, and against other, exchanges and businesses with Bitcoin. On the other side, I think that for the price, we saw a lot of things last year that the price didn't follow. In fact, we saw a big drop yesterday on the Bitcoin price. But at the end of the day, I think that's good news. I don't know how this is going to impact on the price of Bitcoin, but to be honest, Bitcoin doesn't care. Bitcoin is living through 17 years without even having the politicians rooting for Bitcoin. But let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's definitely a wait and see type of situation here. And something I thought that was particularly interesting with this nomination, Fernando, was that Warsh was actually inside the Fed during the 2008 financial crisis, which we know is where Bitcoin was born from. And Warsh has also been critical of the system ever since that crisis. So my question for you is, do you see that as someone who has learned from that moment, or is this someone who might still reach for the same tools if the pressure comes back? How do you feel about that? Do you think he's taken those lessons and he'll hopefully be bringing them now as the head of the Fed chair?
The problem is that it's difficult now to learn from the lessons from 2008. I think that the Fed and United States are in a point of no return. So they cannot say, okay, we are gonna. They tried with Elon, reach the cut the expenses, but now it's difficult. United States is in a crossroads, so they need either to default the debt or print more money. I think that is what Trump wants. Trump wants a Fed chair who put the interest rate to zero so they can print as much money as they want. I don't think that he or someone who is on the financial system learned from the mistake from 2008. Again, we have to wait and see what's happening. On the Bitcoin side, I think it's better to have a Fed chairman that is, let's say, pro-Bitcoin instead of one that hates Bitcoin. So, but yeah, I think I'm not so optimistic with what can happen with the monetary policy in the United States. So.
Yeah, the one reservation that I maybe have about this, and I'm hearing there is concern from people out there, is that, you know, once Bitcoin starts being talked about seriously by policymakers, and now that we might even have a Fed chair that's been openly pro-Bitcoin, there are people that wonder if Bitcoin risks kind of getting absorbed into the political system. Do you worry about maybe Bitcoin, potentially being co-opted by the forces that be, or was it always going to have to go this way in order for Bitcoin to truly find its place in the monetary system? What are your thoughts on that, Fernando?
Well, I think I always say the same. Bitcoin is for everyone. So Bitcoin is permissionless. It's for you, for me, for Michael Saylor, and for the Fed also, for the United States. So I'm not scared because if they control Bitcoin, as long as people control the keys, so it's about the use. Like now you can front run the central bank of the United States and many countries. So I think that, I know the narrative, but you need to understand that around 13 million of Bitcoin are or more are in power of the people. So the government, Michael Saylor, they can try to buy more, but if people don't sell, nothing is going to happen. Yeah. So I don't care about all these narratives. Again, I'm so open to that. Bitcoin is for everyone. So the rest, if you are scared of the Fed buying Bitcoin or the financial system buying Bitcoin, just go buy your Bitcoin, control your keys, and you're not going to be worried about that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And, I do wonder, though, the crypto industry and Bitcoin is a big place for signals and sentiment. So if someone watching right now, Fernando, doesn't own Bitcoin, and they hear this story about the next potential Fed chair being pro-Bitcoin, do you think it makes Bitcoin feel more legitimate and understandable to people not already involved? Or could it maybe even be confusing that it's tied up with politics now? What are your thoughts? Is this ultimately a net positive, you think, for those that aren't already in the space?
It's a good point that people can probably tie with politics, but I think that when it goes more mainstream, I think it's better for the adoption because, for example, someone in their home that say, okay, Bitcoin is a scam, Bitcoin is a scam, Bitcoin is money for criminals, and now you see the Fed talking about Bitcoin, you see Donald Trump talking about Bitcoin, you see BlackRock talking about Bitcoin. Probably this person in the house say, okay, probably we might put something in Bitcoin now. So I think that all the mainstream for Bitcoin is good news. So again, I repeat, I prefer a Fed chairman that is pro Bitcoin than a guy who says, I will ban Bitcoin. But on both
Yeah.
sides, Bitcoin doesn't care. Bitcoin is going to go up forever, no matter the Fed wants Bitcoin or the Fed doesn't want Bitcoin. So, and I always repeat for the people, you need to have, of course, no financial advice, but you need to buy Bitcoin, hold your keys, and you're going to sleep in peace every day. So Bitcoin doesn't care who
Yeah.
is on the Fed, who is the president, or whatever.
Yeah, as the old adage goes, right? Any kind of publicity is good publicity usually, and that's kind of for Bitcoin too, right? Just getting the word out there, getting people familiar about it. Because as you and I know, and as I've talked to, and I'm sure you have too, of countless Bitcoiners, it always takes a little bit of time to kind of wrap your head around Bitcoin and fully understand it. So by people kind of hearing it in passing, that's ultimately all it takes to start. So I agree with you. I think it's a good thing. I'm excited for the winds of change that are coming, and hopefully Kevin Warsh is a good appointment. So we'll see how it plays out. All right, we're moving on to our next story, Fernando, which is also taking place in Washington as a new pressure campaign is taking shape that could ripple straight through the Caribbean. You see, President Donald Trump is threatening tariffs on any country that continues supplying oil to Cuba, expanding his administration's economic offensive against the communist government in Havana. Now, the move is authorized through an executive order tied to a national emergency declaration, giving the White House the power to penalize third countries that help keep Cuba's energy system running. Now, what stands out is what the order does not include. You see, there are no specific tariff rates and no countries named, leaving governments that do business with Cuba kind of guessing where the enforcement line might be drawn. Now, Cuba's government responded forcefully, warning that restricting fuel imports could paralyze electricity generation, agriculture, water systems, and healthcare. State media accused Washington of trying to choke daily life on the island, saying the policy risks deepening shortages that have already triggered blackouts, food insecurity, and increased immigration. Now, the timing is critical here because Cuba's energy lifelines are already weakening. Venezuela, once the island's main supplier, has sharply reduced shipments, and Mexico, now Cuba's largest remaining source of oil, is reportedly reviewing exports amid fears of U.S. retaliation. Trump has also pointed to recent U.S. military actions in Venezuela as evidence his administration is prepared to escalate pressure across the region. Now, this fits a broader pattern in Trump's second term, with tariffs increasingly used as a foreign policy weapon rather than a traditional trade tool. And instead of sanctioning Cuba directly, the strategy raises the cost for anyone else willing to do business with it. Now, why this should matter to our viewers at home is that tariff threats like these can disrupt energy markets, strain diplomatic relationships, and push costs through global supply chains. It is another sign that trade policy is now being used as leverage in geopolitical confrontations and not simply economic negotiations. We're bringing Fernando back. Fernando, when you hear the U.S. threatening other countries over Cuba's energy supply, does that strike you as a strong foreign policy move, or does it maybe feel like something that mostly ends up hurting people far removed from the decisions being made? What's your initial feeling on Trump threatening all of Cuba's trade partners when it comes to energy needs? What's your initial feeling on that?
Well, I think that now I think Marco Rubio said that now they are going for Cuba, that they want to remove the government, the communist government from Cuba. And I think that when Trump, we saw the last year, all the thing with the tariff, I think that these are always, he do these threats to go then for negotiation and make some kind of deals. So, I'm talking about Cuba. Of course, this gives the government of Cuba, the communist regime, some excuses to say, oh, if you don't send us oil, people is going to be living really bad. And people is living really bad in Cuba. By the way, today I just upload on my YouTube channel an interview that I did with a Cuban guy, a Cuban Bitcoiner, and he really tells how people lives in Cuba, not because of the United States, but from the government. But I think that these are geopolitical moves that Trump does in order to negotiate things and work with that. And I think that the goal now is to remove. We were talking about this yesterday. I think that Trump just wants to control all the hemisphere, all the Western hemisphere. So I think that having removed Venezuela dictatorship, now they want to remove Cuba, and probably they will push this way to probably negotiate an exit from the Cuban regime. I don't know, but again, I think that the tariffs are just threats to then start to negotiation. It happened through all this year of Trump in power.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly seems to have been the name of Trump's game, at least in 2025, was rattle the cage, proclaim a bunch of crazy tariffs, and then kind of see what happens. And you have to admit it, it has been effective in some realms here. But you also mentioned Venezuela, which is interesting, and that you spoke to someone from Cuba, because there are some parallels that need to be drawn there. As you know, when we went to Cuba and they grabbed Maduro, here in the United States, people were up in arms about it. There were protests over it. But then on the ground in Venezuela, it seemed like people were actually really happy about it. So my question for you, Fernando, is a lot of these policies that we're seeing Trump wanting to place on Cuba are framed as pressure on governments. But on the ground, regular people are dealing with blackouts in Cuba and shortages. So my question for you is, based on your conversation with this Cuban gentleman, what it seems to be their feeling there? Is this another situation where people in Cuba actually think like maybe a change at the top would be a good thing? Like, how does this compare to you compared to what we saw happen in Venezuela?
I think this is exactly the same. I think that people in Cuba, they want a change of the system, because I was talking with another Cuban last week that the episode is not released, that he was making a comparison with Africa. Africa is so underdeveloped, like Cuba. But for example, African Bitcoiners, they can do whatever they want because the government don't care. But in Cuba, the government is against them. So the government, if they are doing something, the government cuts the electricity, cuts the internet. So they cannot do things because the government is threatened because of what the things that they do. I think that if Cuba, and I hope it's not, I hope if United States removes the Cuba dictatorship, people is gonna be very happy, and Cuba is gonna be much better than now, because I never been to Cuba. I heard stories talking with Cuban people, and to be honest, it's crazy the way they live here, the way they live there. It's crazy.
Okay. Well, it's nice to hear at least it sounds like someone with actual boots on the ground in Cuba is saying that, like, hey, things aren't good there, because the Venezuelan operation went off without a hitch, seemingly, and has really seemed to embolden Trump in his diplomatic efforts across the world. And so I am curious to know if this will be a replay of that and if the people even want it. But it sounds like from what you're saying that life in Cuba is not super great right now, and the people are in fact looking for a change, right?
Yeah, they were telling me that they probably have now like 3 hours of electricity a day. They cannot do a meetup. They cannot do, for example, when I recorded the podcast with this guy, he has to wake up at, I think, 5 a.m. in the morning, because was the only time that he can connect to the internet. Imagine living like this. A doctor salary is, I think, that $10 US, $15 US a month. So imagine how do they live. They were telling me that probably they are doing a workshop, or they are doing education and trying to for example, explain how to use the Lightning Network. And then the power goes off, internet goes off, and they cannot continue. but they develop a total different system that they can keep using Bitcoin without even electricity. So it's amazing what they do. So, but yeah, I think
That
that
is
Cuba
amazing.
needs a change. I think that Cuba needs a change
Yeah.
because this political caste has hostages to the people. They live like kings, and the people is starving.
Yeah. It would be nice is like when we did this with Venezuela, I don't think it was fully out of the blue, but this operation kind of came and went seemingly really quickly. And I wish, like, if they were planning on doing this to Cuba, at least from a PR perspective, it'd be nice if they took, like, a poll. Because I'm just thinking, us as Americans in the outside world, we're just seeing Trump kind of get on his horse and parade into a foreign country, grabbing their leader. Like it's maybe not the best look unless we kind of have more context into what's actually happening in the country that he's going into. Like if we had known before the Venezuela situation, hey, 90% of Venezuelans are really unhappy with Maduro and want to change, I'd be curious as to how these situations might play out a little bit differently in the public eye. Because even as an American, I'm like, he's just kind of cowboying into countries and just taking leaders. Maybe not the best look, but I guess Trump has never been too concerned about optics of that kind. And that actually brings us to our next story, Fernando. That's kind of more of the same, as this one is stretching from Washington all the way to London and Beijing, underscoring how fragile alliances today are becoming. You see, President Trump has publicly warned Britain that deepening economic ties with China are very dangerous, injecting new tension into the US-UK relationship. Now, the warning came as British Prime Minister Keir Starmer wrapped up talks in Beijing with President Xi Jinping, promoting expanded trade, investment, and market access. Now, it was the first visit by a British PM to China in nearly 8 years. And speaking to reporters in Washington, Trump did not expand on the remark, but it follows a familiar pattern of pressuring allies who pursue closer economic relationships with Beijing. Now, he has previously threatened tariffs against Canada over similar arrangements and has repeatedly warned about Western dependence on China. Now, in Beijing, Starmer struck a sharply different tone. In fact, he told business leaders that his meetings with Xi delivered what he described as real progress, highlighting agreements on visa-free travel and lower tariffs on British whiskey. Now, Starmer has argued Britain can grow trade with China while maintaining its close security and intelligence partnership with the United States. British officials quickly pushed back on Trump's comments, saying the government is engaging China with eyes wide open and a clear understanding of the risks involved. Now, the dispute highlights the dilemma facing many U.S. allies. Economic opportunity in China remains attractive, while political pressure from Washington is intensifying. Now, why this should matter to those of you in our audience at home is that these tensions shape global trade, investment flows, and diplomatic stability. And as competition between the world's two largest economies accelerates, allies are being forced to navigate an increasingly narrow middle ground. We're bringing back Fernando to chat about this one. Fernando, when the United States publicly warns allies, close allies like Britain, about working more closely with China, does that sound reasonable to you? Or is that reasonable caution? Or does that start to feel like pressure that's putting allies in kind of an impossible position here? How do you make of Trump's response to this Britain and or this UK and China talks?
Well, we were talking about this also yesterday, and I was looking for the quote of the Prime Minister of Canada in the Davos, during his speech, he said that the world, as we know, is not anymore, and this was a rupture, not a transition. So I think that, as we were talking yesterday, the countries, the allies of United States feels that United States are like hostile against them with all these tariffs, with all I think that the Greenland thing is one of the biggest concerns about, because when Trump went through Greenland, many leaders of Europe sent him messages that, okay, you're doing good with Syria, you're doing good with Iran, you're doing good with Venezuela, but please don't touch Greenland. So I think that the Europe is reacting to that. And on the other side, if Trump keeps threatening the governments to not do deals with China, I think that at the end of the day, they will say, okay, no matter, no, you want to put me tariff, put me tariff. I will do business with China, not with the United States. So I think that I don't know if he can, because one of the things is that what Trump can do with the other American countries, especially Latin America and not big developed countries. But the other thing is what he can do with the European countries. So if I think that if he pushes too much on that way, the European countries will say, okay, never mind, I will do business with China. And China is taking advantage of that. They are not stupid. So China, they know how to play. So that's why I think that Trump must be cautious. But again, you can wait. You can expect anything from Trump. He is, I don't know. It's one day he does one thing, the other day it's super crazy. The things that Trump was doing is totally different of the first Trump, of the first term of Trump. Is so radicalized. I don't know. I understand him going threatening to try to to make deals, but I don't know why he's so radicalized, even with his allies.
Well,
so
yeah.
I don't know, because you're American, so I don't know.
Right now, as
why.
you mentioned, we're kind of seeing this reshaping of the geopolitical matrix and alliances that we've had now since World War II. And Trump is incredibly unpredictable, which can make him a very effective businessman. But I do worry about what the ramifications for that will be down the line, as we're seeing alliances that the United States has held for decades really shifting in real time. And it feels like right now we're at this kind of three axis of power here in the world. You got United States, you got Russia, and you got China. And we're starting to see how this new world order is going to be formed and who's aligning themselves with who. And like if you're Britain, right? Let's put ourselves in Britain's shoes here for a second, Fernando. Trying to regrow or trying to grow the economy while keeping the U.S. relationship strong, I understand that, especially with how unpredictable Trump has been, to your point earlier. So it's like, why wouldn't they do that? Because right now, I don't know if the United States looks like a really strong option right now, given this unpredictability we've seen only in the past year. And you have technically what should be a lame duck president who can't run again. So it looks like Trump's just kind of doing whatever he wants as much as he can, kind of unchecked, because he doesn't really need to worry about getting reelected, right? So do you feel like maybe is that what's happening? Trump has no barriers going forward. It's just kind of do what he wants to do. And there's really no ramifications for him. Like, what do you feel is going on with him right now? Because he has been unusually unpredictable this year. What are you kind of making of that, Fernando?
Yes. I think that can be this. I've been listening about that because United States, the politics are different than in Argentina. Because, for example, in Argentina, a president just can be president 2 terms, but if they wait 1 term and then can go again for presidency. It's not like United States that after 2 terms they cannot run anymore. So probably this is the point, as he said, okay, I'm 79, I think 79 or 80 years old, I cannot run.
Yeah.
Because the Constitution says that I cannot run, and also because nature says that I cannot run. Usually, a person of 80 years old is enjoying their grandkids, not being the president of the biggest country of the world. And probably he's going so hard on that way. But again, I don't understand why you go so hard with your allies. That's the point. I wouldn't go. Of course, you need to negotiate. Of course, you need to try to get the biggest benefit for your country. But on the other side, you have a president that is pursuing the best for the people of the country. So I don't understand. To be honest, I like Trump. I used to like Trump even before he became a president. I wrote his books. I had the art of the deal. I had that's the thing. Sorry. Sorry?
No, it's like I liked Trump a lot more before he was president
Of
because
course.
he wasn't president then. Like he's fun. He's super fun and super likable on like let's have beers with him kind of guy.
Yeah,
But
of course.
when you give him that much power,
But
we've kind of seen it can be unpredictable.
that's the thing. The thing is that the first term was much different. I don't know why he's going this unpredictable and these crazy things that he's doing. Some analytics, some analysts from the Argentinian media says that he's getting ready for a war. So he's moving like a leader moves previous to a war. But
Yeah.
a war against who? China doesn't care. China doesn't want to do any war. China has I think that it's all generated by him. So I don't know what is the point. To be honest, I'm trying to understand because I try to listen many political analysts from the left side, from the right side. And again, I don't understand what he's doing because I wouldn't be so hard with my allies. That's the point. Of course, I will protect I will protect my country, but I wouldn't be so hard with my allies, with the UK, Canada, France, Europe.
Well, I think it's kind of to your point. There's not a lot of time left on Trump's clock, both physically and in office, right? And this is somebody who is clearly that legacy is incredibly important to him and being remembered. So I think he's just trying to get done whatever he can get done in the time he has left and screw any thought of alliances thereafter. All that matters for him right now is getting things done while he's president so that he can boast about it later and talk about how great he was and his legacy, even though the long-term ramifications for this could end up being really bad for the United States. And I don't know. I mean, time will tell on this one, but I don't love mixing it up with your allies like this. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I'm not president. So, all right, we're going to move on to our next story here, Fernando, that's taken place across the world over in eastern India, where the World Health Organization says the Nipah virus spread beyond India remains low. Now, WHO officials say there's no evidence of increased human-to-human transmission and that India has the capacity to contain small outbreaks, but they also emphasize that travel and trade restrictions are not recommended at this stage. You see, that reassurance comes even as countries across Asia have tightened airport screening and health checks for arriving passengers. Indian authorities say the 2 infected healthcare workers are being treated in a hospital, and nearly 200 close contacts have been traced and are currently being monitored. Now, health officials say that Nipah is rare, but its reputation is severe. Now, the virus is carried mainly by fruit bats again, and sometimes pigs, and it can spread to humans through contaminated food or prolonged close contact. It causes acute fever and brain inflammation and carries a fatality rate estimated between 40 and 75%. Now, there is no approved treatment or vaccine at this time, though several candidates are in development. For now, the focus remains on surveillance and containment aimed at preventing isolated cases from turning into a broader public health crisis. All right, let's bring in Fernando back. Fernando, so after everything people learned and experienced during COVID, when another virus story like this starts making the rounds, how do you personally process that? Are you looking at this with caution, with some skepticism, or just some kind of general fatigue because we've done this before? What are your initial thoughts on hearing about this virus?
I think that it's a little bit of general fatigue. I was checking on Instagram the sentiment of the people, and it's not the same as when COVID started. When COVID started, everyone was super scared. I was not, but most of my friends were, oh, I'm scared of the virus, I stay at home. Now the sentiments, what I see when they posted, many people don't care. So, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know the airports. Here in Hong Kong, you have health control on the airports no matter what. So, of course, they take your temperature and whatever. But I didn't go to the airport, so I don't know if they intensify the controls. Again, I think that probably is a super overreaction. Like, the same way that happened with COVID, that for me was a super crazy overreaction, closing everything and stopping the world for 2 years. But I have this feeling, but I think that people, I don't see the same sentiment that I used to see when the COVID started here.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a double-edged sword for me, right? Because we look back at COVID now, years removed from COVID. I remember when it happened, we thought the world was legitimately ending. I thought this was that point in the movie where everybody starts dying left and right. We didn't know. We didn't know, right? So I can't help but, like, I understand the government having to shut things down while you figure it out, because there's two ways you can go. You can go, oh, we don't really care, we don't think it's a big deal, and be laissez-faire about it. But then if you're wrong, all of humanity is wiped out. Or you can overcorrect a little bit and be cautious, because if it is that bad, at least you've taken the cautionary steps to mitigate risk for people on the whole. Now the thing is, we see something like this, and we have plenty of people out there that were like, COVID was fake, it was a big overreaction. We don't fully know that. A lot of people got vaxxed. We don't know what would happen if people didn't have access to those vaccines necessarily, right? Was it perfect? Absolutely not. But it was a really unique situation that we hadn't seen since the Spanish flu. Now, to get to my point, though, I worry that people are going to remember COVID, and we're going to see another thing come up, and we're not going to pay it any mind, because we're like, oh, we've been through this before. It was a bit of a false alarm. It's not a big deal. But then what happens when it is? And all of a sudden, we're lackadaisical about it, because we think we've already seen this chapter, but it ends up being something different. So I'm a little concerned about that, but I also don't blame people for maybe not trusting the public and health organizations, after this first time. So do you think, you think right now people shouldn't be concerned about something like this, or does it still pay to keep a close eye on something like this while we're still learning more about it? Where do you land on that, or is this already in and out of your ear and not in your purview?
No, the point is that I'm not a guy who thought that the COVID was some crazy stuff creating in China to kill the humanity or whatever conspiracy theory. But I'm a guy who, I think that it was a little bit overreaction, and the overreaction stays for a long time. So these 15 days to stop the spreading became months. And then people discovered that, okay, mostly that was the government trying to abuse of their power, because in Argentina happened that way. One of the Minister of Economy say, okay, we were making false, and the people the image of the president was going up. So for that reason, we continued the quarantine. That was the point. So, and people got terribly pissed off on that. So now any intention of doing something or talking about pandemic, people is going to react totally negative. But because I think that for what happened with the COVID was like, okay, the experts from the World Health Organization, people that probably don't have contact with the real world, say, okay, to not spread the virus, we should stop the world. And it's not possible. So this is not practical. So you need to do practical things. And when you do practical things, there are wins and losses on the same place. So I think that this overprotection during the COVID that pissed off a lot of people happens that probably we have nowadays a big deadly virus that has 50% of deadly rate, and people say, okay, I don't care. So I'm always I'm not saying accepting, but I try to not get crazy for everything that can happen, and let's see.
Yeah, I guess that kind of comes down to what what a person's definition of crazy is, right? Because I'd rather have people complaining and moaning that hey, we locked everybody down, than the alternative was, hey, we didn't lock everybody down and a bunch more people died. I knew 3 or 4 people personally that passed away from COVID. So it's when especially people that are being directly affected buy this, it's hard for me, even in the aftermath of this, to be like, yeah, that wasn't the best idea. I'm thinking, well, the 3 or 4 people I might have known might have been 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Who knows? So it's a tough one to navigate. I know it gets politicized and stuff. I just hope that we learned it from it this first time and we're applying those lessons to any instances going forward, right? That's all we can do.
Yeah, I always try to say, okay, just let the person decide. During the COVID, you don't want to take care or you don't want to go out, just stay at home. But again, what's a little bit...
You can't trust people.
Yes,
you can't trust people, Fernando. People were going and having parties and super spreader events, and I knew these knuckleheads that were doing it. So it's like, I agree, people should be able to do whatever, but sometimes people do really dumb stuff even though they know that they shouldn't, you know? So it's like, are you trying to protect everybody or are you trying to, from being, it's super complicated and I don't know what the right answer is. And we're going to take a quick break here, Fernando. And yes.
No, to be honest, the problem is that it's impossible to control everyone. That's the point. So
it is,
and
totally.
So it's the difficult movement to do. So let's see.
Yeah. Someone's going to be upset no matter what way you go about this. So it just is what it is. I just hope we've learned from it going forward because nobody wants to deal with that junk again.
Yes.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here, Fernando, as I need a minute. It got me all jazzed up here. When we're back, we're going to be bringing you our top Bitcoin story of the hour that's coming out of Russia, as it looks like they might have some crypto regulatory framework on the way. And we're going to talk about it as soon as we return from this quick break. See you in a sec.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Currently, the Bitcoin price is sitting at $83,000 this morning. It's taken a bit of a dip in the last 24 hours, and we're going to talk more about this recent Bitcoin dip in the second hour of today's show. But right now, we're going to go into our top Bitcoin story of this hour, which comes from Russia, where after years of mixed signals, Russia is preparing to roll out a formal crypto regulatory framework as early as July, a move that would, for the first time, openly allow ordinary citizens to buy and trade digital assets. Now, according to multiple reports cited by The Block, the new system would legalize Bitcoin trading, through platforms overseen by Russian financial authorities. Now, retail investors would be allowed to participate, but only within tight limits. Under the proposed rules, non-qualified investors would be capped at roughly 300,000 rubles per year, or about $4,000, and would be required to complete risk disclosures and basic investor testing. More experienced or qualified investors, meanwhile, would face far fewer restrictions and could potentially trade without meaningful caps. Now, this marks a major shift from Russia's long-standing legal gray zone around crypto, and the timing is not accidental. This framework follows recent laws allowing authorities to define and seize crypto assets in criminal cases, support domestic trading infrastructure, and expand the use of digital currencies for cross-border settlements under Western sanctions. We're bringing Fernando back to chat about this one. Fernando, Russia, of all places, is now letting people trade crypto, but only under government supervision. When you see that, do you think it shows Bitcoin is winning or that governments are learning how to control it? Where do you stand on this news?
Again, as long as they don't make Bitcoin illegal, Bitcoin is winning, and to be honest, it's funny because Russia. I know a lot of Russians that they do a lot of things with crypto. So I think that they don't care what the government say. If you go to Dubai, it's full of Russians that have. They are super. They are not even in Bitcoin. They are in crypto, super crypto degens. So I think that
Yeah.
the government is like they know that they cannot stop, so they want to do okay. Let's do some regulations so we can do it like legal or we can have some kind of control. But of course, Russians use Bitcoin just or crypto and Bitcoin just before, even if Putin wants or Putin doesn't want. So any law that says okay, we let you use Bitcoin is good instead of
Yeah.
banning it.
This is true, but it does come with an interesting caveat, as the story mentioned that regular Russians will only be allowed to invest about $4,000 a year unless they qualify as an experienced investor. So my question for you, Fernando, is does that feel like real financial freedom to you, or is that like a fake freedom? Where do you land on that? Because it's like great, but also not great.
Well, it happens here in Hong Kong. For example, in Hong Kong, I cannot buy Bitcoin ETF. So because it's I try to buy, but they say something that I'm not registered. I tried to buy because I wanted to try. Okay, we have ETF here in Hong Kong. Let's see if I can buy ETF. I cannot. I can buy stocks, shares, but I cannot buy ETF. Even the Hong Kong one, not the BlackRock, because you need to be a professional investor or blah 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 or whatever. So I think that this control happened. I don't know how much a person can save in Russia. Probably 4,000 US is enough, or they can save probably more, and this is the amount that they want to put in Bitcoin. But again, it's like all the regulations that they can put, people don't care. So there is always a black market. There is always, I told you, a lot of Russians have millions and are in crypto. So, in fact, one of the things, I remember a guy that has a project in South Africa. It's called Bitcoin Ekasi. He used to run a travel agency, and he discovered Bitcoin because Russians that traveled to South Africa, they couldn't pay with fiat because they have the Swift ban, and they pay with Bitcoin like years ago. Okay. So imagine. So again, it's like these are things that show that the government say, okay, we can do it a little bit legal or transparent because we can control something, but Bitcoin is unstoppable.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess it doesn't sound like it's a perfect ruling. I don't really love the caps for regular people. It's definitely a start, and they're heading in the right direction. So as you say, ultimately, I do think this is a big positive for Bitcoin, especially you said with the Russians. There's a lot of Russians that are already dabbling. Now they can do so legally. So I agree with you. I think it's a good step forward. And it's always 2 steps forward when we got you here on the show with us, Fernando. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I got a double dose of you this week, which was extra special. Yeah. For those of our audience out there that haven't had enough of Fernando, the Bitcoin Libertarian yet, what's the best place I can send them to get more of your hot takes on Twitter and our X? And obviously, you have your own great podcast. Tell them where to find it.
Yes, we have we have 2 different YouTube accounts. One in English, one in Spanish. That is my mother language. The YouTube account in English is Libertarian BTC. The Spanish account is Libertarian BTC ESP. The Twitter account is the Bitcoin, THE Bitcoin _, and our Twitter in Spanish is the Bitcoin ESP _ THE Bitcoin ESP _ You can find me there talking in Spanish.
We're going to have to get you to get us a piece of paper you can put on screen, Fernando. I'm not going to remember any of those, but we want to make sure that we do next time. I can just take a screenshot so I can make sure to follow all those. But thank you so much for joining us, Fernando. It's always an absolute pleasure, and you're living in the future, so enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next week, bud. Thanks for stopping in with us. Always a great time.
See you next week. Have a great weekend, and see you. Thanks to having me, and greetings for all the people who is watching.
Pleasure's all ours. Thanks, Fernando. We'll see you next week, bud. And we're going to take a quick break here at Roxom TV News. But when we're back, we're going to be diving into our second hour of today's news stories, where I'll be co-hosting with the great Walker America, who's going to be joining us to talk shop, including what the latest news is and what is going on in Minnesota here in the United States. It's been a crazy week, and we're going to talk about it. So stay tuned. More Roxom TV News coming your way in our second hour right after this quick break. Welcome back to Roxom TV News. Before we dive into the second hour of today's program, let's do a quick recap of the first hour of this morning's show. President Trump is threatening tariffs on any country that continues supplying oil to Cuba, a move that shifts pressure away from Havana itself and onto third countries that keep the island's energy system up and running. We also spent time on the World Health Organization's response to new Nipah virus cases in India, where officials say the risk of wider spread remains low, even as several Asian countries tighten airport screening. And we had breaking news coverage of Trump's nomination of Kevin Warsh to lead the Federal Reserve, a choice that's drawing attention because of Warsh's past comments describing Bitcoin as a meaningful signal of monetary policy. While the Fed's structure doesn't change overnight, the nomination does underscore how Bitcoin has moved into the conversation at the very top of the global financial system. Now joining me for the second half of today's program, to my co-host and other fellow Roxom TV host, Walker America. Walker, happy Friday. Great to see you. How are you?
Doing great, Hank. Right back at you. Happy Friday. Excited to see what's going on today in the wider world and with regard to Bitcoin. It's as usual, there is no shortage of things to cover.
Never ever is. And we got some interesting news this morning. We have Trump coming out saying he wants to appoint Kevin Warsh as the new Fed chair. He has been openly pro-Bitcoin in the past. How was this landing for you when you initially heard it?
So I think it's interesting. I think there's a little bit of nuance here. I would say that he's maybe he's not pro-Bitcoin per se, but he's not anti-Bitcoin. And in this day and age, that's almost the same thing. If you're not openly antagonistic, but you're open to it, I think that that's a good signal. Now, importantly, he has also expressed some support in the past for a wholesale CBDC, central bank digital currency. An important caveat there, he has said that he does not support retail CBDCs, but of course that can be a slippery slope. With regards to his comments on Bitcoin, I think there's some interesting things here. He's said in the past that he views Bitcoin more as software, not necessarily as money, but he's also said it's an important asset, it's a sustainable store of value like gold. And one of his comments I found particularly interesting was around the disciplinary role that Bitcoin can play, calling it, as I believe his quote was, a policeman for policy. So I thought that was very interesting. He said, that Bitcoin does not make him nervous. It doesn't trouble me. He doesn't worry about it. And so, it's also, one of the other things he pointed out was that it helps policymakers know when they got something right or when they got something wrong, because Bitcoin is kind of that barometer for how, monetary policy may, or how well or poorly it may be doing. So I think it's interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, too, it's important to remember that this is still, essentially we've got a new high priest of the fiat monetary system being nominated by Trump. This is really, what it does come down to. At the end of the day, how much of a difference does this make? I know that, markets are kind of digesting this, trying to figure out what to think here. He's had some hawkish stances on monetary policy before. Of course, he was also around during the great financial crisis and, was one of the Fed governors during that time, the youngest ever Fed governor at 35. So I'm watching this, but at the end of the day, it is kind of interesting that we put so much importance on who gets nominated, who becomes the next Federal Reserve chair. Basically, who gets to decide, who gets to be at the top of the fiat priests deciding what to do with our monetary policy. And at the end of the day, I view all of these sorts of let's say positionings and all of this stuff around the Fed just to be really further evidence of why Bitcoin is so structurally important, because it doesn't have this centralized group of unelected central banker bureaucrats that can decide the price of money. Bitcoin is just algorithmically programmed to produce blocks about every 10 minutes. It's got a difficulty adjustment. It halves the new supply every 4 years on average. And, that's quite a big stark contrast to the Federal Reserve, which ultimately is just a group of, as I said, unelected banker bureaucrats who sit in a closed room and decide what to do with the price of money and how much to devalue it at the end of the day. So let's see what happens. I think it's positive that he is not openly antagonistic to Bitcoin. He seems to have somewhat of a similar stance as Jerome Powell, Jerome Powell has called Bitcoin digital gold before. So let's see. It's going to basically be a big question of how much independence does the Fed really have? How much is Trump expecting Kevin Warsh to really play ball with him on the monetary policy side of things? And are we going to enter into an era of QE to infinity, or whatever the new nomenclature they use for money printing is this time? Or is Warsh going to try to push a more hawkish agenda? Let's see. But again, at the end of the day, it's a good time to own Bitcoin, even with Bitcoin dipping down to some recent lows.
Yeah. I mean, this seems like generally more favorable winds are blowing for Bitcoin. Yeah, we did see that pullback yesterday, which was surprising, especially after getting this news. And with regards to Warsh, you got to imagine Trump is putting somebody in there that he thinks is going to follow his playbook and agenda, even though I guess that was originally Powell too, and now he's known as Too Late Powell. So Trump does, as we know, change himself sometimes. But when someone like Warsh is openly acknowledged in the past that Bitcoin is this signal of monetary policy failure, do you think that that could actually change how the Fed will be behaving in the future? Or does the institution just kind of swallow every chair no matter what they personally believe? Do you have any thoughts on that, Walker?
I think that's a great question, Hank. And I mean, it's tough to know. I think as we zoom out a little bit, it's a remarkable thing that you have a guy who's coming in as Federal Reserve Chair and he has statements about Bitcoin in this light, right? It's a key indicator that the Overton window has really shifted dramatically to the point where central bankers used to fully dismiss Bitcoin. Many still do, especially the likes of Christine Lagarde over there across the pond. But here in the US, at least, it seems that, even going to Jerome Powell, he's made statements that make it clear, look, they understand that Bitcoin is this new and not so new, but relative to the U.S. dollar, it's the new kid on the block, right? Yeah. And younger generations, especially. I believe Warsh made additional comments saying that Bitcoin is basically, for anyone under 40, Bitcoin is their gold. And I think that that's a really telling statement. It lets you know that he's at least paying attention to the generational shifts in the mindsets around investing and saving, and that again, his comments about Bitcoin can be kind of a policeman for policy. I don't know if that means in a forward-looking way or more retrospectively. It seems to me more retrospectively. It lets them know when they did something wrong. Yeah. I don't know how much it impacts their day-to-day decisions, but at least you've got somebody who's paying attention to it, who's speaking semi-favorably about it. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But at the end of the day, it's a great reminder for people that, look, Bitcoin doesn't need a centralized group of central bankers to determine its monetary policy. It does that all by itself. The monetary policy has been set since day one. The Fed cannot so much say the same, but it certainly keeps things interesting out there in fiat land.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is nice to have one of the highest positions in the monetary land, at least acknowledging that Bitcoin very much has a seat at the table. So, that to me is at least a net positive win, but it remains to be seen as to exactly how he's going to be approaching monetary policy during his tenure. And he still has to actually get appointed, right? Like this was solidified in the role. He's been appointed, but it's not fully confirmed, correct?
That's correct. He still has to go through, it has to be approved by Congress. So this is, Trump making his announcement as to who he is nominating for this. But let's see what happens. There's obviously a lot of partisan infighting going on, or outfighting, however you'd like to say it. And it would not be surprised if this is something where he goes through a very rough confirmation process. But I always do like these sort of interviews that happen between Federal Reserve officials and Congress, because a lot of things that are usually, they say the quiet part out loud a lot of times. And so I always enjoy those. It's always very interesting to watch, always gets a little bit spicy. So let's see what happens there. It should make for some very entertaining watching.
Yeah, at least for us to talk about it. So I'm excited. I'm sure we'll be jamming more about this topic throughout the year. So it'll be giving us a lot of fodder for sure. All right, we're going to move on to our top story of the hour. But first, let's play the singer, guys, and we're going to get into the top news of our second hour. The top story of today's second hour is unfolding in Minneapolis and is no longer just a local flashpoint. You see, what began as protests over recent federal immigration shootings have grown into a national pressure campaign that is now forcing changes in how immigration and customs enforcement operates, at least on paper. Federal officials say ICE operations in Minneapolis will now be more focused and dial back on the raids in residential neighborhoods. According to Homeland Security, agents have been instructed to prioritize people with serious criminal records and to avoid direct confrontations with demonstrators. This shift follows mounting legal pressure and growing political backlash. But even as officials describe a de-escalation, the response on the ground has not slowed. Across the country, labor unions and activists are planning protests today, and this momentum is spilling directly into Washington's budget fight. Senate Democrats say they are prepared to block funding for the Department of Homeland Security unless the administration agrees to new limits on ICE operations. They are tying those demands to negotiations over temporary spending bills needed to keep the government open past next month's deadline. Now, without a deal, funding for border security immigration, courts, and federal law enforcement could lapse, reviving government shutdown fears. Now, activists and local officials in Minnesota say raids, surveillance, and detentions continue, just with a lower profile. And according to an Associated Press investigation, a sweeping digital surveillance network has become a central pillar of the crackdown. Federal agents in Minnesota have been stopping motorists and scanning their faces with smartphones, sometimes without consent, while demanding proof of citizenship. Those scans feed into interconnected databases pulling from immigration records, travel histories, biometric images, and even commercial data sources, dramatically expanding the government's reach into everyday life. Homeland Security relies on tools like the Mobile Fortify facial recognition app, which companies live scan with photos pulled from so-called trusted sources. Now, those databases are shared across local, state, federal, and even international agencies. In some cases, agents continued scanning people even after objections, and civil liberties advocates warn that U.S. citizens are being swept up alongside undocumented migrants. A lawsuit cited by the AP says these tools have been used more than 100,000 times in the field, despite limited public oversight. And beyond facial recognition, enforcement is increasingly powered by artificial intelligence and private sector partnerships. The Department of Homeland Security is piloting more than 100 AI systems using Palantir software to sift through enforcement tips and exploring links with license plate reader companies that can map people's movements. Critics warn that the result is a surveillance apparatus capable of reconstructing individuals' routines and associations at a scale that was unimaginable only a few years ago. They also fear tools built for immigration enforcement could eventually be repurposed to monitor lawful protest and political activity. We're bringing Walker in for this one. Walker, we're hearing that ICE is using facial recognition, license plate readers, and large shared databases to identify and detain people, sometimes during routine traffic stops. What's your reaction to immigration enforcement being carried out this way? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that this has always sort of been the end game for any sort of widespread surveillance efforts, right? Is to normalize the actions taken by the government in order to make people more pliable the next time around. We saw this sort of thing happening with COVID. This is not necessarily anything new. That was really one of the first experiments in true widespread tracking of the population and compliance enforcement. Now, right now, these sorts of new surveillance technologies, which are honestly, frankly, quite terrifying. I don't think people have an exact idea of how strong the networks are that support these sorts of facial recognition software. And I mean, the stuff that we see as citizens is nothing compared to what the government actually has, of course. But this is really, I would expect nothing less from the government at the end of the day. This is the government using any excuse that they have to be able to implement widespread surveillance of their citizens. This is not something that is unexpected, but it is something that I think should be troublesome for people. Now, it starts with this sort of immigration enforcement. That's that's their rationale, right? But I'm certain that they have many other ways to be able to actually enforce this immigration policy without surveilling, law-abiding citizens. But of course, it always goes back to the question of, well, as a law-abiding citizen, why do you need privacy if you have nothing to hide? Well, it's the same thing about saying, why do you care about free speech? What does it matter there? It's like, saying you don't care about privacy because you have nothing to hide is the same as saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. Doesn't really make much sense once you think about it for more than a few seconds.
Yeah, this is certainly troubling, but like you said, this might have been the plan all along, but it's certainly not quelling fears that we're seeing specifically in Minnesota. And a lot of those fears are helping draw in voices far outside traditional activist circles. As in Washington, dozens of religious leaders have now entered the fight directly. More than 50 demonstrators, including Bishop Dwayne Royster of Faith in Action, were arrested inside the Hart Senate office building after staging a sit-in calling for restrictions on ICE funding. Now, participants carried banners reading, "Do justice, love, kindness, abolish ICE," and sang hymns as Capitol Police warned them to disperse before making arrests. Now, organizers said the goal was to pressure lawmakers as Congress debates Homeland Security funding in the shadow of the Minneapolis shootings. They framed immigration enforcement not only as a legal or political issue, but as a moral one, arguing current tactics violate basic ethical and humanitarian standards. Now, Walker, I want to bring you back. We've had more than 50 religious leaders who've been willing to get arrested inside a Senate building over this issue. What is that telling you about how immigration enforcement is being viewed outside of traditional political circles right now?
Well, again, I think this has clearly become a flashpoint issue for people, right? What I wish is that the people who cared so much about government overreach right now cared about government overreach so much when their political, their flavor of the political duopoly was in power. That's the sad thing to me, is that you see that people coming and crying about government overreach right now, but they didn't do it the last time around when massive amounts of surveillance was used. And deplatforming was happening. People were getting fired from their jobs for refusal to take experimental vaccines. And so I think, again, we see this sort of thing happening right now. You have to ask yourself why everybody's being activated at this particular moment, why this is the particular flashpoint that has been chosen, again, as we talked about yesterday, especially when the deportation numbers under Trump are a fraction of what they were under any prior administration. So why the specific amount of unrest right now? Why the caring about government overreach right now when it's very convenient for them, but not so much when their color of the duopoly happens to be in power? So, I think that this is going to continue to get more heated. It's going to continue to get more widespread. But you should take a step back and ask yourself why. Again, what are they not wanting to cover right now that they're instead having to cover this? I find it all very interesting. I'm trying to remain as removed from it as I can so that I can actually pay attention to what may be happening behind the curtain.
Yeah, no, the instances like this are always interesting because it oftentimes can be rooted in a lot of seeming hypocrisies, kind of like the ones you mentioned. And I think about Minneapolis too. You had a lot of people on the right saying, hey, homeboy shouldn't have been concealing and carrying a gun at a protest. But last time I checked, that was protected by the Second Amendment right. So there's a lot of interesting things going on both sides of the aisle right here, where people kind of use what's convenient for them at that given time as their rationale for things. And I don't think it'll be stopping anytime soon. In the meantime, though, I think we're going to move on to our next story that you, my friend, are leading, unless you got one more thing to say on this one.
No, I think we can go ahead and move it on. I'm sure we will have a lot more to say in the weeks and months to come around this, because I do not anticipate it goes away anytime soon. But yeah, we'll jump into the next story here, which is around the state's push to eliminate homeowner property taxes as the election year revolt grows. So coming from AP News here, a growing number of states are moving to abolish property taxes as homeowners, tapping into voter anger over rising tax bills and soaring home values. We're seeing lawmakers now in Georgia, Florida, and North Dakota are advancing plans to phase out or sharply reduce taxes, arguing that people should not risk losing their homes because they cannot, quote, pay rent to the government. I think we can all identify with that sentiment there. But supporters say that measures offer long overdue relief, while critics warn it could drain billions from schools and local services. In Georgia, Republican leaders have unveiled a complex proposal to eliminate most homeowner property taxes by 2032, shifting the burden towards sales taxes and other fees. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has made eliminating homeowner taxes a long-term goal, with lawmakers considering a 10-year phase-out of non-school property taxes. North Dakota is already using oil revenues to wipe out taxes for tens of thousands of households, expanding tax credits that cost the state hundreds of millions of dollars. The push reflects what tax experts describe as, quote, a new property tax revolt, driven by retirees and middle-income homeowners squeezed by rising assessments. The AP highlights voters like a disabled retiree in suburban Atlanta whose tax bill jumped by 50% in 6 years, even after paying off his mortgage. Similar movements are emerging through ballot initiatives in states such as Oklahoma and Ohio, echoing earlier uprisings like California's Proposition 13 in the 1970s. But economists and local officials warn that eliminating property taxes could leave cities and school districts scrambling for replacement revenue. Property taxes fund most K through 12 education in many states, and sales tax often falls short or are legally capped. Analysts say that fully ending the tax would be, quote, very difficult without deep spending cuts or major tax shifts, setting up a political test of whether states can deliver popular relief without undermining basic public services. Hank, I'd love to bring you back on here for this, because I don't know about you, but property taxes are a beast, right? It's one of those things where, as we said earlier in this piece, it does feel as though you were just paying rent to the government, and you may say, well, if you just don't pay your taxes if you don't like it. Well, the problem is that if you don't pay your taxes, they take away your house, and if you don't agree with them taking away your house and you try to resist them, they throw you away in jail. And if you don't agree to go to jail, they end up killing you. So ultimately, I mean, Hank, do you view property taxes in this case as basically government extortion, or do you think they're sort of a necessary evil for to maintain school district budgets, as some proponents would argue?
I mean, they're necessary. It's a necessary evil until we find another way to do it, right? And they're outrageous. I mean, I know, like in my home state of Illinois, specifically in Chicago, they're outrageous now with the new mayor, Brandon Johnson. I think he ran on I'm not going to touch him. And then he raised everybody's 50 to 100% because Chicago's an absolute shambles economically. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what else you're going to do. Where's that money going to come from? If we're not taxing homeowners, we're taxing somebody else, somebody. So I feel like we're just passing the buck between one kind of tax or another. They are outrageous, though, but I don't know. Is there another solution? Does Bitcoin solve this, Walker? Because unless Bitcoin solves it, I don't know what the answer for that is right now. Property taxes bring in so much money. And like you said, what are the schools going to do? They can't rely fully on Powerball tickets or whatever that whole thing was for a while. Do you see another way around this?
Well, I mean, unfortunately with Bitcoin, you can't live in a Bitcoin, right? As much as some people may want to. You do need a place to live. I think with property taxes, it's undeniable that they've gotten excessively bloated, especially in Illinois, which we're both obviously familiar with. Property taxes are absolutely absurd. And it truly does just feel like paying rent to the government. Even after your mortgage is paid off, you continue paying them. It's also a bit of a tax on unrealized gains, because even if the assessed, you don't sell your house, you're not trying to dispose of the asset, right? And your house is assessed at a higher value because they keep printing money. Well, you pay property taxes on that higher value. So it really is sort of a silent, unrealized capital gains tax. Personally, I'm in favor of more of a sales tax model. It's a consumption-based tax. You're paying taxes based on how much you are actually consuming, versus just paying a ongoing yearly tax simply for the right to still live in the property that you apparently own. But of course, you don't actually own it at the end of the day if the government can take it away from you for not paying property taxes. Now, I think one of the key points here is that, and it's one of the things that was mentioned in this story, is that, okay, there are a couple ways that you could basically make this a bit more workable, right? And one of them is to actually reduce your spending, to make spending cuts. As we all know, I mean, if we can talk about Illinois specifically, I think Illinois has something like the most municipalities of any state in the country. So there's all sorts of different crossovers, so many different bureaucrats taking a slice of the pie. You've got just massive amounts of bureaucratic bloat at every level of these, from the local to the state legislatures. And so at the end of the day, if you want to make things more workable, if you want to be able to still fund the schools, well, decrease the number of bureaucrats that end up sucking a pension away for life for just being a pencil pusher and ultimately suckling at the teat of the taxpayer. That's just my opinion. I would like to see property taxes go away in favor of a consumption tax. But if you're not going to do that, then at least get rid of capital gains tax. At least get rid of income tax. The problem is that we have so many different taxes that siphon off the hard-earned money from people at every single level of interaction with the state, where the state isn't actually present or providing any value, whether it be income tax, capital gains tax, sales tax, property tax, inheritance tax, death tax, exit tax. They tax you every single place they can. And at the end of the day, I don't think that we get the benefit that we deserve for the amount of money that we're spending. But hey, that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, we're funding all these Somalian daycare centers with our tax money right now. I mean, that's a big part of it, though, right? We really do need to, there needs someone who goes in the government and actually finds out where all these billions of dollars are going, because this Minnesota fraud scandal, unearth potentially billions just in Minnesota. So you extrapolate that out across the country, I'd be wondering, like, maybe we don't need to be charging people property taxes that are that exorbitant because maybe we're just really bad at funneling the money where it needs to actually be going. Maybe that's part of it. I think your sales tax idea, I think, makes a lot of sense too. You pay what you consume, kind of a deal. But as we know, the wheels of bureaucracy move very slowly. So I'm certainly not expecting any big changes anytime soon. As much as I hate to say it, sorry. I know Illinois, they're brutal, just bad.
They sure are. And yeah, I mean, I think that it's a fair point that ultimately this system, the system that you want to see changed, the people responsible for changing it are the ones who benefit most from the absolute amount of bureaucratic bloat within that system. We also saw what happens when you try to make big changes and cut fraud, waste, and abuse. This is why Elon Musk went in and started doing the Doge initiative, which I think was great, and then very quickly became disillusioned with that effort and realized that in fact, as Lynn Altman stated, nothing stops this train. Basically, there is just no way to get around this the inertia of this system. And when you try to make cuts to things, nothing ends up actually moving at the end of the day. Some stuff got cut, sure, but a very small fraction of what I think Elon was hoping to in terms of the identified total amount of fraud, waste, and abuse that they were finding there. And that's just at the federal government level, not even to mention the state, and local. So yeah, there's a lot of fat to cut. Unfortunately, I don't think we can give our government, a prescription for Ozempic.
Yeah, it's really a shame too, because I feel like hating taxes is one of the few things Americans on both sides of the aisle can just agree on, which actually brings us to our next story here, because Americans hate taxes so much, even President Donald Trump is currently suing the IRS and the Treasury Department for $10 billion over the leak of his confidential tax records. The lawsuit alleges federal agencies failed to prevent the unauthorized disclosure of tax information that was shared with news organizations between 2018 and 2020. Trump, his sons Eric and Donald Trump Jr., and the Trump Organization are named as plaintiffs, claiming the leak caused financial and reputational harm. According to the filing, Trump argues the disclosures damaged his business interests and negatively affected public perception ahead of the 2020 election. Those leaked records became the basis for reporting by outlets including the New York Times and ProPublica, which detailed Trump's tax payments over several years. Federal investigators traced the leak to Charles Edward Littlejohn, a former IRS contractor working for Booz Allen Hamilton. Now, Littlejohn pleaded guilty and was sentenced in 2024 to 5 years in prison for stealing and sharing tax records belonging to Trump and thousands of other wealthy Americans, including other prominent business leaders. Now, prosecutors describe the case as one of the most serious breaches of taxpayer confidentiality in IRS history. The lawsuit comes shortly after the Treasury Department cut its contracts with Booz Allen Hamilton, citing failures to adequately safeguard sensitive data. Now, Treasury officials said the firm did not meet security expectations despite its access to highly confidential information. And the White House, IRS, and Treasury Department have declined to comment on the lawsuit so far. Now, for those of you at home, this case matters because it raises questions about how securely taxpayer data is handled and who is accountable when safeguards ultimately fail. And the outcome could reshape how federal agencies manage contractors and protect sensitive information going forward. We're bringing Walker back. Walker, let's forget Trump for just a second. If this can happen to a former president, what does that say to you about how exposed the average person's financial information really is right now? Is this a need for alarm?
Well, I mean, I think it's just a great example of how anytime you have centralized control of a massive amount of sensitive personal information, that creates a massive honeypot. And there are clearly motivated actors, whether they're motivated monetarily or politically, who would seek to benefit from that massive honeypot. And that's exactly what we've seen here. I think this was probably a politically motivated attack, but I would not be surprised if a great deal of money changed hands as well. You hear that it wasn't just Trump's data that was leaked. It was also, a lot of other data was stolen. And it just sort of makes you wonder, I mean, how serious do they actually take the security over this? We all have been to a DMV and we know let's say the rigor with which the government apparatus operates. It doesn't instill a lot of confidence. That's obviously an extreme example, but you know what? Basically the entire government just operates like a DMV, probably except the military, which does actually, we still, manage to have the finest fighting force in the world. But that's because it hasn't been completely destroyed with a bunch of middle management bureaucrats, which you see in every other layer of government. So at the end of the day, I don't really trust the government to take care of any sensitive personal information. I don't think that anybody really should. And you should assume that this information will eventually leak. I mean, heck, we use the whole social security number system was never even meant to be a universal identifier for people. It was just something that was the only system we had to give everybody a number, and we ended up sticking with it after a while because they couldn't think of anything better. And so that system alone is just ripe with fraud. And I mean, any of these cases where you have a bunch of sensitive personal data that is at the fingertips of not just government employees, but contractors, and they're not doing proper security audits of those contractors, yeah, you're going to end up with situations like this. So not surprised even in the least. This is just par for the course when it comes to dealing with the government.
Yeah, I got to say, Walker, you just got me really depressed because now I'm thinking about the DMV and extrapolating that level of efficiency out through other arms of the government. And no wonder billions of dollars are being misplaced constantly and nothing's really getting done. You've got me really worried about the state of the union here. And this particular lawsuit, I wonder, do you think it will actually bring about any change of behavior inside agencies, or do they mostly just end with settlements and this will just be business as usual at the end of the day? To you, this is just kind of another Trump threat, or do you think this will actually change anything going forward?
I don't know if it actually changes anything going forward. Of course, it's also interesting, because you've got basically the sitting president suing one of the institutions that is underneath his own purview. So it's a very interesting dynamic, all things considered. I think that also what the changes that we are going to see in the coming years are going to be around removal of a lot of, and this is a good thing on one hand, a bad thing on the other. I'll explain why. The removal of a lot of the middle management type, let's take the IRS specifically, removal of a lot of those middle management type people, a lot of the investigators, the auditors, because so much of it is going to be automated away. It's going to be automated away using artificial intelligence, it's going to be automated away using all of these different new pieces of technology that are out there that now make it very, very trivially easy to collate massive amounts of data and to find patterns within those. So I think we're probably actually going to see IRS audits rise as that process becomes more automated. And at the same time, it's going to be much more difficult to appeal that because there's going to be a lot fewer people actually working there, which, a good thing to reduce the government bloat, but a bad thing for the average person who may somehow get caught up in the dragnet of large language models parsing through all of their taxpayer data and finding ways that they somehow violated their obligation to give the federal government a massive amount of their hard-earned money. So we'll see what happens here. It's the double-edged sword of technology is that it will reduce the bureaucratic bloat, but it's also going to reduce or increase, I should say, the bureaucratic action that is taken against citizens.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And we can forget about any real kind of privacy going forward. It sounds like that might be a thing of the past. And that actually leads us to our next story, where we might not even be able to trust WhatsApp for privacy anymore. I know you want to talk a little more about that, Walker. So when you're ready, let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and for the record, I've never trusted WhatsApp, but this is just further reason not to trust it. Personally, a Signal user over here, which you can trust maybe just a little bit more. But the U.S. is currently probing into claims that WhatsApp messages may not be fully private. Shocker. So the U.S. Is investigating allegations that Meta employees and contractors are able to access WhatsApp messages, despite the company's long-standing claims that the service is fully encrypted and private. According to a Bloomberg report, former contractors told investigators they had, quote, unfettered access to user chats. One contractor told investigators that Facebook teams were able to, quote, pull whatever they wanted from WhatsApp systems, while others said that they personally reviewed message content during moderation work. Meta has strongly denied the allegations, saying it is technically impossible for the company or its workers to read encrypted messages. The company acknowledges it can receive limited message data when users report abuse, but insists that broader access does not exist. This comes as Meta is already under long-term oversight from U.S. regulators following past data scandals. For now, investigators have not announced any findings or charges, leaving unresolved questions about whether one of the world's most widely used messaging platforms delivers the privacy it promises. Hank, I'd love to bring you back up here for this because, again, to me, this is just a key example of why you need to use open source tools that can be fully publicly audited by a bunch of white hats, black hats, and everyone in between to figure out if the claims that a company or organization is making are actually true. Is this something that's surprising to you? I mean, Meta literally admits that they can view some message data when abuse is reported, so we already know that a backdoor exists there. The question is, to what extent does that backdoor give them, as this one contractor reported, quote, unfettered access? Would love to get your take.
I think whatever Facebook is telling us or Meta is telling us, it's not enough. I absolutely believe they have full access to all this. I mean, Facebook was kind of the first, and I actually worked for the company that did this initially when I was in college. I interned for them, was like the first company where you could really track people's moves on social networks. So they have been able to make everything so granular to even like the smallest little clicking decisions you make. They're taking that data, using it, and selling it. So this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Like you said, this is a Meta product. Zuckerberg has been known to do this throughout his tenure at Meta. He's not stupid. He understands that data is the big thing right now and going forward. So I feel like they've got access to all of this. I mean, you've been on your phone before, or you've typed something in, and you'll even just talk about it, and all of a sudden you'll see an ad on Meta for that exact freaking table you were just talking to your friend about like a couple hours previous. So this is not surprising to me. It's why we need these decentralized systems like Signal. If it's good enough for Pete Hegseth to have war secrets on, it's good enough for me. So yeah, not surprising at all. Zuckerberg's a little data thief. Yeah, I would have expected this. What about you?
Allegedly, of course, allegedly.
Oh, allegedly.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, I think.
Do you have a different take on this?
No, I'm in agreement with you here. Just wanted to protect you by saying allegedly there. But I think that this is this should come as no surprise to people, right? Anytime you have these centralized platforms, and it's not just about the platform themselves having access to it. It's like if the platform has access to it, you can be sure that three-letter agencies, both foreign and domestic, have access to these things as well, right? Many times they're working hand in hand with these corporations, with these platforms, to be able to make sure that they have that kind of access. Heaven forbid people be allowed to communicate privately. I mean, could you imagine what might happen if people could just talk to each other without the government knowing about it? And so at the end of the day, there's the surveillance from the platform itself, but there's also the surveillance from intelligence agencies, neither of which should surprise you. But again, it's a great reason for people to pick up and start using these decentralized, open source encrypted messaging tools that are out there. It's better learn now rather than later when you really need it.
Yeah, I think I might just go back to making little notes and crumpling them up and throwing them at people like I used to in grade school. That was truly inaccessible by the government, because right now I feel like they got their ability to put their hands in just about everything right now. And, especially with Zuck's change of posture kind of cozying up to Trump, I remember toward the end of last year, beginning of last year, end of the year before, as he saw Trump beginning in office. So it's funny to see how these things change over time. I got a feeling he's giving that all to the government right now, but we'll see. This is all alleged for now. Thank you again. I don't want to get sued. We're going to take a quick break, Walker and I, but when we're back in, we got more stories to chat about, so stay tuned. RoxomTV News coming right back after this. Growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. And you can use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee, and right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more.
My name is Walker America. The price of Bitcoin is currently 83,000 infinitely printable Federal Reserve notes per Bitcoin. But recently, Bitcoin took a little bit of a dip further than that, crashing down, touching 81,000 US dollars per coin. Again, Bitcoin price is about 83K this morning, but it briefly did touch down to 81,000, triggering a fresh crash. Headlines and renewed debate over whether Bitcoin will hold the $80,000 support level or slide toward the mid-70s, or who knows, all the way back to 58K, gang, so they can celebrate once more. The pullback was largely driven by leverage unwinding, not a collapse in the fundamentals, of course. Within hours, billions were wiped away from the market as stop losses and forced liquidations cascaded lower. In total, roughly $1.68 billion in crypto positions were liquidated over a 24-hour period, with Bitcoin accounting for the majority of that forced selling. This type of flush has been a recurring feature of Bitcoin bull markets, sharp, violent, and designed to reset excess risk. From a structural structural perspective, this move still fits well within historical volatility ranges. Bitcoin has repeatedly seen over 15 to 25% drawdowns during prior bull cycles without breaking the broader uptrend. While $80,000 is now a key psychological level and technical level to watch, and even a briefer dip towards 75K would remain consistent with normal bull market consolidation rather than signaling a cycle top. More importantly, the long-term backdrop hasn't changed here. Institutional adoption, ETF demand, corporate treasury accumulation, and sovereign interests continue to build beneath the surface, even if retail appears to be piling into gold and silver, the quite literally shiny objects in the room. And at the end of the day, this is just a tremendous opportunity to stack cheap Bitcoin. While everybody else is panic selling, it's a great time to be panic buying. Hank, I'd love to bring you in here. What's your read on this? You're covering this stuff every single day here on RoxomTV. You've got your finger on the pulse. What are you thinking right now? How are the vibes?
Bitcoin is dead, or that's all the text I got yesterday when I saw it went down to 80.81, so pretty much par for the course. I'm thrilled about it. I'm getting cheaper Bitcoin than I got just a week ago. It is surprising given all the favorable tailwinds we're seeing, especially here in the United States. But as you mentioned, the backdrop for Bitcoin right now is so markedly different than it was just a year ago. I think what we're seeing right now is, retail still isn't come to play in the most recent era that we're the most recent, what's I'm looking for? Stanza of this Bitcoin journey that we've seen. And that sentiment really seems to drive price traditionally very dramatically and quickly. But now we have this solid institutional foundation, and it seems like 80 has been kind of the holding line we saw when we had that kind of flash crash back in October. So, if you've been in Bitcoin for a while like you and I have, this is like year 10 for me. Again, we're at highs at 126, around 80 now. That's like a 30% something crash. This is really just what we've come to expect at this point, and I'm honestly more bullish than ever. Things are setting up really nicely for the future. I don't get too worried about these little flash crashes right now. How are you feeling about it, Walker?
Well, I haven't been in Bitcoin quite as long as you, Hank. I was, kind of a COVID adopter at that time. So, but I've still seen a little bit of, been over a cycle now. And I think that's when you really need to sort of see the writing on the wall. And what I think is really interesting here is that, Bitcoin is now, if you look over the past 5 years, it's like Bitcoin and gold are basically even in terms of their gains over the past 5-year period. And additionally, Bitcoin has really not made a prior all-time high in gold yet to date. So what I would love to hear from you, Hank, is, do you think that Bitcoin actually ever did start to enter into a bull market again, or has Bitcoin just sort of been an extended bear market if we're looking in gold terms, which is a better measuring stick than fiat? And as we go forward, do we start to look, we start to move out of that bear market in gold and actually get into real bull market territory, and maybe that's where things get interesting?
Yeah, that's a really good point. In relation to gold, for me though, okay, so maybe it's equal in relation to gold, but I still don't think really the world for the most part sees it that way. Everybody's looking at it in relation to fiat, right? So are we in an extended bear market? Boy, that's a really good question. I don't know. I really don't know. I feel like right now we're seeing a lot of uncertainty in the world as a whole, and we're having people flock to those traditional safe havens as a result, which is why we've seen this explosive growth from gold in the last year or two. Silver now is also on the board, is jumping quite a bit. I just don't think most of the world looks that way, and I think that's a big part of the reason we haven't seen the growth we anticipated from Bitcoin, is I think people are still thinking, as Nolan Bowerly would put it, in US trash tokens, right? We're thinking in that way. People aren't looking at gold versus Bitcoin, they're looking at Bitcoin versus the dollar, and that's what number go up is all about, right? So I don't think we're in an extended bear market. I think we're right where we probably should be right now. Bitcoin always does the opposite of what you think it's going to do. If you had asked me at the beginning of last year where Bitcoin would be right now, I'd be like, oh, dude, 150, 170, definitely. It makes too much sense, but right now we're at 80. So for me, this is Bitcoin doing exactly what I would expect, which is exactly what I wouldn't expect. So I feel pretty good about it, honestly. And like you said, this is a great opportunity to continue stacking your bags at cheaper prices, because Bitcoin could go a little lower than this. But the writing on the wall and the people that you and I talk to every single day, I just don't see it going anywhere except up and to the right going forward. I think this is a small dip like many others we've seen before. So, yeah, that's how I'm feeling about it. Do you think this is an extended bear? What's your read on it?
Well, I think that maybe we just never fully got into a new bull market. I think that we never actually we never had that big euphoria and all that, and maybe some of that I've seen the argument made, and I think you and I talked about this a little bit as well, but just that maybe the treasury companies sort of absorbed some of the retail euphoria, and that's why you saw sort of blow off tops in them. Versus seeing one in Bitcoin, which has been a little bit more muted in terms of the price action. It's been more so chop solidating, crabbing along, however you'd like to say it, over the past over a year now. We've basically gone nowhere over the last year, and so I think it's sort of been boring everyone to death a little bit. Again, maybe people are rotating into or just getting into precious metals or whatever else is the shiny thing of the particular day. But let's see what happens, because against the price backdrop, I think you had incredible news in terms of medium of exchange adoption this year, whether it be Jack Dorsey's Square opening up Bitcoin payments to 4 million merchants, whether it was just someone like Steak and Shake, popular fast casual chain that started not only accepting Bitcoin, but stacking Bitcoin and even is paid in Bitcoin. So there was a lot of great adoption, I think, that happened this year. But maybe people just didn't pay as much attention to it because they were just too hyper focused on price, and price was not giving them the signals that they wanted. But you know how it is, Hank. People never line up for Bitcoin when it's cheap. They always line up to buy Bitcoin once it starts going on an uptrend again. So I think that's probably going to repeat again here. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. And apparently in Bitcoin, it rhymes very frequently.
Yeah, I just don't think this has been a really sexy era compared to what we experienced during the COVID times, where everybody was getting free money and Robinhood was there and everybody was locking in these exponential gains, and anybody who was investing that time felt like Warren Buffett. I remember I was up 600%. I was like, I am so smart. We just haven't seen that this time. But ultimately, if you ever wanted Bitcoin to truly be an integral part of the monetary system, it was always going to have to kind of become a little boring, a little slow and up and to the right. You don't really see the crazy spectacle outside of the stock market, but at some point you could even call that gambling. So if we want Bitcoin to be this safe haven asset, then I think we were going to kind of have to expect this more chop salad, crab walking era here. And I think that's ultimately a good thing. Before we eventually hit the next big leg up, but I'd be shocked to see any of these meteoric rises of the past. I think it's just going to be a slow and eventual crab walk up and to the right, and ultimately I think that's a good thing. But it definitely is less fun. So I think that might have something to do with it.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. The last thing I'd say in this before we move on to the final story of the day is maybe we do still see some of those more violent upswings and probably downswings too, because just look at how the market caps of gold and silver have shifted. I mean, we saw silver and gold moving, Bitcoin's entire market cap basically in the space of a few hours. So, I mean, if that can happen, clearly the capital is out there floating around. It's just not quite flown into Bitcoin yet. But when it does, Bitcoin's only a $1.8 trillion market cap at this point, maybe 1.7 now after the recent dip. And so, to think that Bitcoin can't double that market cap pretty easily, or triple or quadruple, I don't know. I think again, Bitcoin does what you at least expect it to do, right? And it only takes a couple of days of the year for Bitcoin to make basically all of its gains. So it's always about time in the market, not timing the market with Bitcoin, because as we've seen, nobody has a crystal ball when it comes to the orange coin.
Yeah, and you make a great point. The money is there. It's just not flowing into Bitcoin right now. But again, as the generations that are younger keep getting older and Bitcoin's always been a thing for them, there's no doubt to me that eventually it will start flowing into Bitcoin, and it's going to be sooner than later. So I feel I'm fine about all this. Let the gold bugs have their day. Peter Schiff can go parade around on his soapbox a little longer. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, they really needed a win here. But I think it's about time for us to jump into the next story here, which is one coming kind of directly. It's news on Roxom from our other side of the house here. But BitcoinTreasuries.net just plugged into Roxom Markets. So BitcoinTreasuries.net announced a new integration with RoxomTV's parent company, Roxom. This connects Bitcoin Treasury directly to a Bitcoin-denominated trading value. The integration allows users to trade select Bitcoin Treasury companies directly from BitcoinTreasuries.net, linking balance sheet analysis to execution. The announcement comes alongside Roxom's broader launch of what it describes as the first global stock exchange denominated and settled entirely in Bitcoin. The platform enables access to publicly listed equities, including Bitcoin Treasury companies and digital asset treasuries, without relying on fiat rails or banks or traditional brokerages. Roxom CEO Borja Martel Stewart says the platform is designed for investors who already think in Bitcoin. He noted that treasury-focused equities have become increasingly important for Bitcoiners looking to accumulate more Bitcoin, adding that Roxom brings pricing, metrics, and performance tracking into a fully integrated Bitcoin native framework. Beyond equities, the exchange is part of a wider Bitcoin-first infrastructure push. Roxom has already launched a Bitcoin-denominated spot and derivatives market, including perpetual futures tied to benchmarks like the S&P 500 and gold, priced and settled directly in Bitcoin. The big picture here is that BitcoinTreasuries.net and Roxom integration points to a market evolution where Bitcoin is no longer just tracked on balance sheets, but increasingly used as the base layer of capital markets themselves. Hank, I'd love to bring you back on here because for me, I think this is just, it's very interesting to see. It's really an example of really, if you measure in fiat, you're not measuring with a very good measuring stick, right? But when you measure in Bitcoin, you actually find out if you're a good trader or not, because if you're not growing in Bitcoin terms, but you're still growing in dollar terms, well, that doesn't really matter. It matters, are you accumulating more Bitcoin at the end of the day? But what's your take?
Well, yeah, I mean, Bitcoin's the hurdle rate. You and I know that. And what this really signals to me is a signal I get from a lot of the great entrepreneurs that I get to chat with, and I'm sure you have as well in the space. Like, this isn't a big hype-driven thing here. This is infrastructure being built quietly and in real time and backed by real serious capital that sees where the world is headed, right? So I'm super excited about this. Obviously, we have our ties to Roxom, so we're all part of the family here anyway. But I think this is a big moment, especially for people that don't, the United States has had the international currency or whatever forever now, but now I don't have to trade into US dollars to trade Bitcoin, especially if I'm abroad. I can just put my Bitcoin straight in. I'm avoiding taxes. There's a lot to like here, and I think it's just another example of the rails being built for the next, for the monetary revolution that we're kind of experiencing right now with Bitcoin. And again, it's not big and flashy. It's slow and it takes time, but that's how you get it right. So I'm super pumped about it. It's great to be part of the team that's making these rails for the hyper Bitcoinization that we're experiencing right now. So I'm all about it and super proud of the team that's making it happen.
Yeah, I think it's also a good example of just forcing people to think in Bitcoin terms. Because if you're thinking in dollar terms, you really haven't made that mental switch yet. Once you start actually thinking in Bitcoin, things become a lot more clear. Again, you talk about people trading on Robinhood or whatever, you're up a couple 100% or whatever. Okay, but how did you do versus Bitcoin? Are you actually up or are you just up in dollars? And I think these sorts of developments that Roxom has here, it's really forcing a mentality shift amongst people to come to terms with the fact that you may think you're a good trader, but at the end of the day, you're not unless you're going up in Bitcoin denominated terms. So let's see, it may force a lot of people to come to the realization that they are not as good of traders as they thought, but let's see.
Yeah, and this is one of those situations, and we've talked about it before, and in today's world, people don't, I think, really think about things as problems until they directly see how they affect them, right? And that's like a big thing I think we're seeing with like immigration. And I have friends in Minnesota who are all about what's going on there now. And I respect that, and it's a good cause. We should be fighting for that stuff, but it's because it directly impacted them. So they're very impassioned by it, maybe more than some other people are, right? And I see that same thing with Bitcoin. Like if somebody, I've thought about this, I don't know if anyone's done it yet, like the second Amazon starts showing prices in Bitcoin next to dollars, people are gonna be looking at the world in an entirely different way. Or maybe someone makes a plugin where I can see those prices in Bitcoin, and we can see how much more expensive everything is getting all the time. And we just don't see that the same way with prices ticking up a few cents here and there. So if there was a way we could see that, like the way that Roxom is presenting that, I think it's really going to get people more into that headspace you talk about, which will be great for adoption and helping people realize that you don't need to be in this fiat rat race all the time. And there are other options out there. So yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think this helps get us further along that journey. And this is just the start, right? So it's exciting times for sure.
Yeah, and actually to your point about plugins for that, I can confirm Marty Bent and his team at TFTC actually did build a plugin for exactly that. It's called Opportunity Cost, I believe. It's a Chrome plugin. and essentially allows you to
Nice.
automatically convert any prices that you see that are shown in any sort of fiat. It automatically converts them to Bitcoin on the fly. So yeah, if you're trying to break an Amazon shopping addiction, that's probably a pretty good way to do it, is to start seeing what is the opportunity cost, how many sats are you missing out on, by buying whatever that new gadget or gizmo happens to be that you really, really need right now. But do you?
Yeah, that's another point too. We should probably be talking about things in terms of sats and not Bitcoin, because like nobody, I don't want to think out to the 8th decimal. That's just too much to deal with. But if you're saying, hey, that cost 5,000 sats, like, okay, it's a little easier for me to get my head around that than 0.000005 Bitcoin or whatever. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm glad there's people out there who are making those devices and programs so we can start seeing the world through the orange lens, because I think it's going to help a lot of people out there. So I'm excited for it. And I'm excited to have you back co-hosting with me again next week, Walker. I think this concludes our time for today. Before we let you go, any big things on the weekend? Anything people should be checking out on your channel?
Boy, I'm taking the weekend off of my channel, but there's certainly a large backlog.
For
You
you.
can see I do have an interview coming out with Eric Yakes, who's been a frequent guest here on RoxomTV as well, running through his entire 21 predictions for 2026. That should be dropping on my channels here pretty shortly here. But yeah, I'll see you guys next week again here on RoxomTV. Tuesdays, I run for 3 hours from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Then I'm back here with you, Hank, every Thursday and Friday as well. So we'll roll right into it again next week.
Can't wait. Sounds great. And enjoy your weekend, Walker. Thanks for co-hosting with me today. Always a pleasure.
Good to see you, Hank.
All right, gang. See you later, bud. That's a wrap for this week at Roxom TV News, everybody. We're back in the studio. We were on our mobile studio for the first 4 days, but we're back in action right here. And we'll be back on Monday, same place, different time as our Monday time. Just as a quick reminder, is at 10 a.m. Pacific to 12 p.m. The rest of the week, Tuesday through Friday, 8 a.m. Pacific to 10 a.m. Pacific time. So as always, thank you so much for tuning in with us. If you haven't already, do the thing. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, me and Hank at Roxom TV, and make sure to check out Walker America as well. You won't regret it, and you can find us on all the platforms you choose to do your doom scrolling on. Until then, we will see you Monday for more of the world's top news stories. So until then, stay safe, stay humble, and hodl on, everybody. See you next week.